On that particular morning, under the golden hue of a rising sun, the trajectory of a simple shepherd boy's life was destined to be altered forever in ways history would never forget. For 40 agonizing days and nights, a giant warrior, feared by the entire mobilized army of Israel, had been humiliating the kingdom with a terror that froze the blood. He stood as an insurmountable mountain of bronze and muscle, and not a single soul among the thousands of Israelite soldiers dared to challenge him. But courage, the kind that descends from the heavens, often finds its birthplace in the most unexpected of hearts. It does not always dwell in the chest of the armored veteran, but sometimes in the quiet confidence of a youth. And on that fateful day, armed with nothing but a simple leather sling and 5 smooth stones from a brook, the impossible was about to manifest into reality. High upon the rolling, verdant hills of Bethlehem, far removed from the clamor of war, 17-year-old David was tending to his father's flock. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wild thyme and the gentle bleating of sheep. He sat upon a jagged rock, his fingers dancing over the strings of his lyre. The melody he created merged effortlessly with the morning wind, weaving a psalm of gratitude and peace. His voice, clear and strong, sang out to the empty hills, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." It was a moment of perfect tranquility, a stark contrast to the violence brewing miles away. But this peaceful morning was abruptly shattered. The sound of frantic footsteps crunched against the dry earth. A messenger, breathless and flushed, came running up the slope. "David! David!" the messenger gasped, doubling over. "Your father is calling for you. It is urgent. You must come at once." David's heart skipped a beat. He secured his lyre and ran with the speed of a gazelle down the hillside toward his family home. As he arrived, he saw his father Jesse standing before the entrance. The old man's face was etched with deep lines of worry, his eyes filled with a heavy burden. Beside Jesse sat a large sack, packed tight with roasted grain and loaves of bread. "My son," Jesse said, his voice trembling slightly as he tried to catch his breath. "The situation with your brothers, it is bad. They are in the valley of Elah, facing the Philistine lines. But something is wrong. They have been there for 40 days, yet no battle has been fought. A terrible dread has settled over the camp." David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. His 3 eldest brothers, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, were tall, strong warriors in King Saul's army. For them to be in danger was unthinkable. "Take these provisions to them," Jesse instructed, gesturing to the heavy sack. "Bring this grain and these 10 loaves of bread to your brothers. See how they are doing. Bring back some token from them, so I know they are safe. This standoff, it is continuing in a very strange and disturbing way." David hoisted the sack onto his shoulder, testing its weight. "Why is no one fighting, Father? Why the delay?" he asked, confusion clouding his young face. Jesse's expression darkened, as if a shadow had passed over the sun. "They say there is a champion among the Philistines, a giant. His name is Goliath. Every single day he steps out from their lines and challenges the army of Israel. He mocks us. He says, 'Choose a man from among you to come down and fight me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us.'" David was astounded. "And no one accepts? Not one man?" "No one has the courage," Jesse whispered, shame coloring his tone. "He is so massive, so terrifying. It is said that even King Saul trembles at the sight of him. These words ignited a strange fire within David. It wasn't fear, it was something else. Indignation? Disbelief. How could the army of the living God be paralyzed by fear of a mere man, no matter how large? Go quickly now, Jesse urged, placing a hand on David's shoulder. And be careful, my son. The battlefield is a dangerous place, even without fighting. David set out immediately, the heavy sack on his back and his shepherd's staff in his hand. As he walked the dusty road toward the valley of Elah, his mind drifted to his past. He remembered the long, lonely nights watching the sheep. He remembered the roar of the lion that had leaped from the thicket, and the growl of the bear that had threatened his flock. He remembered how fear had tried to grip him then, but a supernatural strength had surged through his veins. He had fought them, not with steel, but with his bare hands and the strength of the Lord. He had killed them both. Why am I remembering this now? He wondered as his sandals kicked up dust. Why bring me news of a giant when I have conquered beasts? Perhaps, a thought whispered in his soul, perhaps God is calling me for a different purpose? Maybe the lion and the bear were just preparation. As he approached the valley of Elah, the sounds of camp life began to drift toward him. The clanging of metal, the shouting of orders, the whinnying of horses. He crested the final ridge and looked down. The sight took his breath away. The Israelites were camped on one hill, and the Philistines on the opposite hill. Between them lay the valley, a deep, silent divide that served as a no-man's land. David felt a surge of excitement mixed with that strange, unnameable expectation. For the first time in his life, he was seeing the full might of the armies, thousands of spears glinting in the sun, banners waving in the breeze. Yet, despite the visual grandeur, the atmosphere was heavy. It felt as though this journey was not merely an errand to deliver bread and cheese. It felt like the beginning of something far greater than visiting his brothers. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the valley floor, the young shepherd walked down toward the unknown. He did not know it yet, but the peaceful life of the shepherd, the quiet days of the harp and the hills, were behind him. He would never be just a shepherd again. When David finally reached the encampment of Israel, he was out of breath, his chest heaving from the exertion of the journey. The scene was chaotic, yet paralyzed. Thousands of tents stretched out in rows, countless warriors sharpening blades, the smell of unwashed bodies and roasting meat hanging in the air. But beneath the noise, there was a palpable silence, a spiritual silence. The smell of fear was stronger than the smell of the fires. David! A familiar voice cut through the din. It was his eldest brother, Eliab. He spotted David and rushed over, but there was no brotherly warmth in his eyes. His face was twisted with a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. "What are you doing here, boy?" Eliab snapped, looking around to see if anyone was watching. "Who is watching those few sheep in the wilderness? Did you leave them to the wolves?" "Father sent me," David replied calmly, lowering the heavy sacks to the ground. "I brought food for you and the others, and he wanted to know how you are faring." Abinadab and Shammah appeared from behind a tent, joining them. They too looked exhausted, their eyes hollow, their posture slumped. "The situation is not good," Shammah muttered, tearing off a piece of the bread David had brought. "We have been here 40 days. 40 days of staring at them. Not a single battle has been fought." "Why?" David asked, genuinely perplexed. "Why do we wait?" At that precise moment, a sound erupted from the other side of the valley. a sound so deep and resonant it felt like the earth itself was cracking open. Israelites, is there no one among you today either? The entire camp seemed to freeze. Soldiers stopped polishing their swords. Conversations died in throats. Men looked at one another with wide, terrified eyes. David turned his gaze toward the valley floor, and then he saw him, Goliath. The boy had heard stories, but reality defied imagination. He had never seen a creature like this. He wasn't just a man, he was a monolith. Standing over 9 feet tall, he blocked out the sun. His shoulders were as wide as barn doors. He was clad in scale armor of bronze that weighed more than a normal man. The scales shimmered menacingly in the harsh sunlight. The spear in his hand was thick as a weaver's beam, a shaft of wood like a tree trunk, tipped with an iron point that could pierce a stone wall. "My name is Goliath," the giant bellowed, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I am a warrior of Gath. I will wait here until one of you has the guts to come down." David watched the faces of the Israelite soldiers. They were pale, drained of blood. Some were instinctively taking steps backward, away from the ridge. "If he defeats me," Goliath roared, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, "then we, the Philistines, will be your slaves. We will bow to you. But if I kill him, if I crush your champion, then you will be our slaves. You will serve us. Come on. Who is brave? Who is a man among you?" Silence. Absolute crushing silence from the camp of God's people. David could not believe what he was seeing. "Who is this man?" he asked aloud, his voice cutting through the quiet fear of his circle. "Who is he to humiliate the army of the living God like this?" "Hush," Eliab hissed, grabbing David's arm roughly. "You don't understand war, boy. He is a giant, a killing machine. No one can fight him. Even the king stays in his tent." "But the God of Israel," David pressed, his eyes blazing. "God is God, but this is real life. This is flesh and blood." Eliab retorted, his anger flaring to mask his own cowardice. "Go back to your sheep, David. Leave the fighting to men." But David could not leave. Something inside him was boiling over, a righteous indignation that he could not suppress. How could they let this uncircumcised Philistine, this idol worshiper, stand there and mock the chosen people? How could they let him insult the creator of the universe? Goliath's voice boomed again, laden with contempt. "What is wrong, little Israelites? Are you afraid? Where is your God now?" "Ha ha, ha ha, ha ha." His laughter was a deep, guttural sound that rolled over the valley like thunder. With every laugh, the shame of the Israelite soldiers deepened. They looked at their feet, unable to meet the giant's gaze. "This cannot continue," David whispered to himself. "It will continue," Shammah said sadly, "because no one wants to die today. Go home, David." But David did not turn back. His eyes were locked on the giant in the valley. A strange sensation washed over him. It wasn't the adrenaline of youth. It was the whispering of the Spirit. It felt as though God himself was speaking to his heart. "Who will stop this man?" David thought. "What will happen to the honor of Israel? What will happen to the name of God if we let this stand?" As the sun reached its zenith, hanging high and hot above the standoff, a resolve hardened in the young shepherd's heart. It was a decision no one expected, a decision that seemed like madness. Evening approached, and the campfires were lit. David moved among the soldiers, listening, observing, and asking questions. "King Saul has promised a huge reward to the man who kills the giant," One soldier whispered over a bowl of stew. "What reward?" David asked, stepping into the light of the fire. "Great wealth," the soldier replied, his eyes wide. "He will give the man his own daughter in marriage. And more than that, he will exempt the man's father and his entire family from all taxes in Israel. A free house forever." The gears in David's mind turned. But it wasn't the gold or the princess that stirred him. It was the principle of the matter, the insult to God. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? David asked loudly, addressing the group. Eliab, hearing this from a nearby tent, stormed over. His face was red with fury. "Enough. What are you doing here? I know the evil in your heart. You came down just to watch the battle? You are arrogant and wicked. Go back to your sheep." David stood his ground, looking at his brother with pity rather than anger. "Now what have I done?" he asked calmly. "Can I not even ask a question? Is there not a cause?" He turned away from Eliab and continued to speak to another soldier, asking the same things. Who is he to defy God? David's persistent questioning and his lack of fear began to draw attention. For 40 days, men had only whispered in terror. Now, a boy was speaking with boldness. Word spread quickly through the ranks until it reached the royal tent. "My lord," a servant said to Saul, "there is a young shepherd in the camp. He is asking questions about Goliath. He does not seem afraid." Saul, sitting on a makeshift throne, looked up. He was weary, his eyes rimmed with red from sleepless nights. The burden of the giant was crushing him. "Bring him to me," Saul commanded. David was escorted into the royal pavilion. The interior was lavish but dim. Saul looked at the boy, ruddy-cheeked, bright-eyed, carrying a shepherd's staff. "Are you the one asking these questions?" Saul asked, skepticism in his voice. "Yes, your majesty," David replied with a bow. "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." Saul blinked. He almost laughed. This boy was speaking with the confidence of a general, yet he looked like he should be in school. "My son," Saul said, his voice dripping with condescension, masked as concern. "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. He was killing men before you were born." David stepped forward, his demeanor shifting. He was no longer just a boy. He was a witness to power. "Your Majesty," David began, his voice steady, "your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth." Saul listened, captivated by the intensity in the boy's eyes. "And when it arose against me," David continued, pantomiming the action, "I caught it by its beard and struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." The commanders in the tent exchanged glances. Was this madness? Or was it something else? "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine," David declared. Saul looked at the boy for a long time. 40 days of silence, 40 days of cowardice from his best men. And now, this shepherd. Perhaps God had sent him? Or perhaps it was a suicide mission that would at least buy time. "Go," Saul said finally, exhaling a heavy sigh. "And the Lord be with you." But you cannot go like that, Saul added. Clothe him in my armor. The servants brought the king's own armor, a heavy bronze helmet, a coat of mail, a massive sword. They strapped it onto David. David tried to walk. He took a step and nearly toppled over. The metal clanked and restricted his movements. He felt trapped, encased in a shell that wasn't his. I cannot walk with these, David said, struggling to undo the buckles. I have not tested them. This is not how I fight. God will not save me through bronze and iron. He stripped off the royal armor until he stood once again in his simple tunic. He picked up his staff and his sling. This is suicide, one of the commanders shouted. He has no protection. But David was resolute. God's power is not in the weapon, but in the Spirit. I trust in him. As he turned to leave the tent, Saul called out one last time, My boy, if you wish to change your mind, no, your majesty, God is calling. And with that, David stepped out of the tent, walking through the rows of stunned soldiers, heading straight for the valley floor. As David descended the rocky slope into the valley, his heart hammered against his ribs like a war drum. Behind him, thousands of Israelites watched from the ridge, a sea of silent spectators witnessing a boy walking toward his death. But David's internal monologue was not one of fear. I am not alone, he reminded himself with every step. The living God walks with me. The same God who shut the lion's mouth is here in this valley. He reached the dry riverbed at the bottom of the ravine. A small stream trickled through it. He knelt down, the cool water rushing over his fingers. He needed ammunition, not iron arrows or bronze tips, but the weapons of the earth. He looked into the water, the sun glinting off the wet rocks. Lord, he prayed silently, guide my hand. Show me the stones you have prepared. He selected the first stone, perfectly round, smooth as an egg, fitting snugly into his palm. He found a second, slightly heavier, dense, and solid. Then a third, smaller, jagged edges worn down, aerodynamic. The fourth, medium-sized, polished by years of water flow. And the fifth, the largest of them, yet perfectly balanced for the sling. He dropped them into his shepherd's bag, the leather pouch resting against his hip. He checked his sling, the leather cords he had braided himself, the pocket worn soft from years of use. It was a simple tool, but in the hands of an expert, it was deadly. From the opposite ridge, a boom of laughter rolled down. What is this? Goliath's voice shook the air. Is that a boy coming? Ha 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 ha! The Philistine army erupted in raucous laughter, a chorus of mockery. The Israelite side remained deathly silent. David stood up and began to walk up the opposing slope. His steps were measured and determined. With every yard he covered, his prayer deepened. Lord, let your name be hallowed. Today, the whole world will see that there is a God in Israel. Not a myth, not a statue, but a living fire. As he drew closer, the sheer scale of Goliath became terrifyingly clear. Up close, the giant was a monstrosity of violence, 3 meters of height, biceps as thick as David's waist. The armor plates shifted and clanked like the scales of a dragon. The spear point alone weighed 15 pounds. And he wasn't alone. A shield bearer walked in front of him, carrying a massive barrier of wood and leather. David was effectively facing 2 men. You? Goliath sneered, looking down from his towering height. He removed his helmet to get a better look, revealing a face scarred by battle and twisted in hate. Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? He cursed David by his gods, by Dagon and Baal. Come to me, boy, come here. I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. I will tear you apart." David stopped. They were about 100 yards apart now, the perfect range for a sling, but dangerously close for a charge. David took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the dusty air of the valley. It was time to speak. "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin," David shouted, his youthful voice projecting with supernatural clarity across the valley. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The words rang out, striking the ears of both armies. The Israelites gasped. The Philistines stopped laughing. There was a power in this boy's voice that unsettled them. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand," David continued, pointing a finger at the giant. "And I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel." Goliath's face turned purple with rage. "You little dog! You dare challenge me! Kill him!" "Then all this assembly shall know," David screamed, his voice cracking with emotion, "that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." Goliath roared and began to charge. The ground literally shook with his stride. Clank, clank, clank. David did not flinch. He did not run away. He ran toward the giant. He reached into his bag. His fingers found the smooth, cold surface of the first stone. The most famous duel in the history of the world had begun. Goliath was a moving fortress. As he ran, the sound of his bronze armor was deafening, a cacophony of impending death. His massive spear was leveled, the iron tip aimed straight at David's chest. His eyes burned with the bloodlust of a killer who had never known defeat. "The moment you die, I will cut off your head, boy," the giant screamed. David was sprinting now. He wasn't running in fear. He was running with passion, fueled by a holy fire. His fear had evaporated, replaced by a laser-focused clarity. The distance closed rapidly. 50 yards, 40 yards, 30 yards. On both ridges, thousands of men held their breath. Time seemed to slow down. The wind stopped. The birds went silent. At 25 yards, David skidded to a halt. His movement was fluid, practiced 1,000 times on the lonely hillsides. His hand dipped into the bag, grabbed the stone, and in one seamless motion, placed it into the sling's leather pouch. Goliath was still coming, a juggernaut of momentum. "Are you scared yet?" "Ha ha 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 ha." 20 yards. David began to spin the sling, round and round above his head. The hum of the leather cord cutting the air grew higher in pitch. It was the sound he knew so well, the sound that had saved his sheep from the lion. 15 yards. The sling was a blur. The centrifugal force was building, the stone begging to be released. David's eyes locked onto a target, no bigger than a small fruit. The exposed skin of Goliath's forehead, just below the rim of his helmet and above his eyes, the only vulnerable spot. 10 yards. The giant was almost upon him. The shadow of Goliath fell over David. "For your glory, Lord," David cried out. And he released one of the cords. The stone left the sling with the velocity of a modern bullet. It was invisible to the naked eye, a blur of judgment hurtling through the air. Goliath was mid-stride, preparing to thrust his spear. Crack! The sound was sickeningly loud, the sound of stone meeting bone. The projectile struck Goliath exactly in the center of his forehead. It didn't just hit him, it sank into him. The skull fractured instantly. Goliath's eyes rolled back into his head. The light of consciousness was extinguished in a fraction of a second. His momentum carried him forward for one more teetering step. He stopped. He swayed. What happened? He seemed to mumble as blood began to pour from his nose and eyes. And then, timber. Boom! The 9-foot giant crashed face first into the earth. The impact sent a tremor through the ground that David could feel in his sandals. The armor crashed with the sound of a collapsing building. Silence. Total, absolute silence. David stood there, his chest heaving. God had done it. The giant was down. But the job wasn't finished. A wounded snake could still bite. David ran to the fallen colossus. Goliath lay motionless, face in the dirt, but his massive chest still hitched with shallow, unconscious breaths. David had no sword. He looked at the giant's scabbard. He reached down and grasped the hilt of Goliath's own sword. It was incredibly heavy, a weapon meant for a monster. David had to use both hands and all his strength to slide it from its sheath. The steel rang as it came free. You threatened us with this blade, David panted, standing over the fallen enemy. Now, by this blade, you end. He raised the massive sword high above his head, the sun glinting off the polished edge. With a grunt of exertion, he brought it down. The blow was true. David reached down, grabbed the giant's hair, and lifted the severed head. He turned toward the armies of Israel and the Philistines. Blood dripping onto the valley floor, he raised the grisly trophy high and screamed, "The Lord has given the victory. God has saved us." In that moment, the spell was broken. The Israelites erupted. A roar went up from the camp that shook the hills. The Lord has given victory. The Philistines, seeing their invincible champion decapitated by a shepherd boy, were seized by a supernatural terror. Their God was dead. Their strength was gone. Run! Run for your lives! Panic swept through the Philistine ranks like wildfire. The sight of Goliath's head in David's hand was the catalyst for total collapse in the Philistine lines. "Our hero is dead," they screamed, throwing down their shields and spears. "They have a demon. Run." Discipline evaporated. The once mighty army became a stampede of frightened men. They abandoned everything. Their tents, their weapon racks, their gold, their food. Survival was the only instinct left. On the Israelite ridge, the scene was the polar opposite. The fear that had held them captive for 40 days transformed instantly into a predatory fury. "Attack!" King Saul bellowed, his sword drawn, his face flushed with sudden revitalization. "The Lord is with us. Charge!" The men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, rushing down the slope like a landslide. Empowered by David's impossible victory, they chased the fleeing Philistines out of the valley. Long live David! Long live the God of Israel! The war cries echoed off the canyon walls as the chase began. They pursued them as far as the entrance to the valley and to the gates of Ekron. The bodies of the Philistines were strewn along the Shaaraim road. But in the center of the valley, the eye of the storm remained quiet. David stood alone next to the headless corpse of the giant. He wasn't dancing. He wasn't boasting. He was breathing hard, looking at the stone in his hand. The other 4 were still in his bag. He didn't need them. "Lord," he whispered, tears mixing with the dust on his face. "You did this. I was just the vessel. All glory is yours. Eliab came running down the hill, lagging behind the charging army. He stopped when he saw his little brother. The anger was gone from his face, replaced by shock and awe. He looked at the giant's body, then at David. David, Eliab stammered. You? How did you do this? I didn't, brother. David said softly. God did. Abinadab and Shammah arrived moments later. They stared in silence, unable to comprehend the visual reality before them. We apologize, little brother, Shammah said, bowing his head in shame. We were angry because we were afraid. You were brave when we were cowards. As the sun began to set, the Israelite army started to return from the slaughter. They came back laden with plunder, swords, gold armbands, supplies looted from the Philistine tents. But their greatest prize was their restored honor. King Saul descended into the valley, his royal guard flanking him. He approached the boy who held the giant's head. Whose son are you, young man? Saul asked, though he knew the answer. It was a question of lineage, of trying to understand the source of such greatness. I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite, David answered, bowing low, still clutching the trophy. Today, Israel owes you a debt it can never repay, Saul said, his voice thick with emotion. Your Majesty, David replied with genuine humility, I am but a servant of God. The victory is his. Saul watched him closely. There was a purity in this boy, a light that Saul realized he had lost long ago. From this day forward, Saul declared, placing a hand on David's shoulder, you shall not return to your father's house. You will live in my court. You will be a commander of men. Standing nearby, Saul's son, Prince Jonathan, watched David. His soul was instantly knit with the soul of David. He saw the same spirit of faith in the shepherd that he carried in his own heart. That night, the campfires burned brighter than ever before. The air was filled with laughter and songs of victory. Did you see the stone fly? The giant fell like a tree. The boy didn't even blink. God was with him, truly. Amidst the celebration, David sat quietly by a fire, his fingers finding the strings of his lyre once more. This time the song was new, a psalm of deliverance. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They have bowed down and fallen, but we have risen and stand upright. That night the shepherd boy slept not as a keeper of sheep, but as the Savior of Israel. His life had changed forever. The same power that had delivered him from the lion and the bear had delivered a nation from the giant. And this was only the beginning. It took a week for the news of the victory to spread to every corner of Israel. Runners carried the tale from Dan to Beersheba. A shepherd boy has killed Goliath. The Philistines are defeated. Crowds began to flock to wherever David was. They wanted to see the giant slayer. In Bethlehem, old Jesse sat in his house, shaking his head in disbelief. My youngest, my little David, he killed the giant? When David finally visited, he hugged his father. Yes, father, he smiled. God did great things. Jesse looked at his son with tear-filled eyes. The boy looked older, wiser. My son, I think your days of shepherding are over. Destiny has called you. Indeed, everything was shifting rapidly. At the palace, Jonathan made a covenant with David, loving him as his own soul. He stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David and his armor and even his sword and his bow and his belt. You and I are brothers, Jonathan said, no matter what happens. Saul kept his word and set David over the men of war. David went out wherever Saul sent him and behaved wisely. But the true shift was in the hearts of the people. When the army returned from battle, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing, to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang as they played and said, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Saul heard the song, and his face twisted. The smile vanished. A dark shadow passed over his eyes. They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. He muttered to himself. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? David noticed the change. The warmth in the king's eyes was replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "Jonathan," David whispered to his friend one evening, "your father looks at me differently now." "Do not worry," Jonathan reassured him, though he too felt the tension. "He is just tired, maybe jealous, but you are loyal. Keep doing what is right." But it did not pass. The jealousy in Saul's heart grew into a murderous rage. An evil spirit tormented him. One day, while David was playing the lyre to soothe the king, Saul's hand tightened around his javelin. "I will pin David to the wall," Saul thought. Suddenly, he hurled the spear with all his might. Whoosh! David, sensing the danger, dodged just in time. The spear embedded itself deep into the wall, vibrating from the force. David fled the room, heart pounding. "The king is trying to assassinate me," David told Jonathan, shaking. "This will pass," Jonathan tried to say, but his voice lacked conviction. "My father loses control, but you are too valuable to him." It did not pass. Saul became paranoid, seeing David not as a hero, but as a usurper. One night, the situation reached a breaking point. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him and to kill him in the morning. Michal, Saul's daughter, who had become David's wife, warned him, "If you do not save your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed." "Go, my love," she cried, lowering him down through a window. "My father is mad with jealousy." "I have done him no wrong," David protested, tears streaming down his face. "I fought his battles. I killed his enemies." "I know," Michal whispered, "but your light makes his darkness visible. Go." David fled into the night, leaving behind the palace, his wife, and his position. He ran back toward the wilderness, toward the only safety he knew. He was a hero, yet he was a fugitive. In the shadows of his journey, he met Samuel the prophet again, the man who had started it all years prior. "Prophet," David cried, "I just want to serve God. Why is this happening?" "My son," the old prophet said, his voice raspy but firm, "God has great plans for you, but greatness is forged in fire. You must pass through the trials. Saul will hunt you. You will live in caves. You will be hungry, but God is shielding you." Samuel reminded him of that day in Bethlehem when he had poured the horn of oil over David's head in front of his brothers. "Remember the oil, David. You are the anointed one. You are the future king of Israel." When the Spirit of the Lord had come upon him that day, David had changed. He was no longer just a shepherd. He was a king in waiting. But the throne was not yet his. He would have to wait years. He would have to endure the wilderness, the betrayal, and the constant threat of death. He would have to learn to lead men who were broken and bitter. He would have to learn to rely on God when he had absolutely nothing else. The day he killed Goliath was not the end of the story. It was merely the prologue. The true story of King David, the warrior, the poet, the sinner, the saint, was just beginning. And as David sat in the cave that night, hiding from the king he had served, he looked up at the stars and whispered the words that had started it all. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want."